fearless cosmic predators. That was before they encountered humans. The Vrathkai had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never known defeat. They had never tasted fear. They had never met a species that did not tremble before them. They stood 9 feet tall, with bodies covered in black exoskeletons harder than steel, and their eyes could see heat itself, tracking prey through total darkness with perfect accuracy. Their claws could tear through metal like paper, and their spines carried venom that could kill most species in seconds. On their homeworld, they had evolved as the ultimate hunters in a place of eternal night where only the strongest survived, and they had risen to the top of every food chain they encountered. Now they owned the stars themselves. High Predator Kethvaros sat upon his throne of bones aboard the flagship Endless Hunt, watching reports from across his vast empire with cold satisfaction. 3 spiral arms of the galaxy belonged to his kind, and dozens of species served them as slaves, as workers, as entertainment. The Galactic Council existed only because the Vrathkai allowed it to exist. It was a collection of weak species who gathered together and pretended they had power. But everyone knew the truth. The Vrathkai were the true masters, and all others existed at their mercy. Once every cycle, the Vrathkai held their sacred culling festivals, where they would hunt members of conquered species for sport. It was their greatest tradition, a celebration of their superiority, and the screams of prey echoed through their arenas as crowds cheered. Fear was something the Vrathkai understood very well, but only as a tool. They had studied it, weaponized it, and used it to control entire civilizations. They knew how fear smelled, how it tasted in the air, how it made lesser beings freeze or flee. But feeling fear themselves was something completely foreign to them. Why would the ultimate predator ever need to be afraid of anything at all? Kethvaros had led countless hunts across the stars, and he had personally slaughtered thousands of prey from dozens of species. His trophy room held skulls from every corner of the empire, and his name was spoken in terrified whispers on 100 worlds. When his scout ships reported a new discovery at the edge of the galaxy, he leaned forward with interest. A small yellow star with 8 planets, and on the 3rd planet, a species that had just begun to travel between stars. "Show me these creatures," Kethvaros commanded, and the holographic display came to life before him. He saw them then for the first time, small beings with soft skin and no claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. They stood on 2 legs and had flat faces with forward-facing eyes, and they wore artificial coverings over their weak bodies. "Pathetic," one of his advisors hissed with amusement. "They have no natural weapons at all. How did they even survive on their own world?" Kethvaros studied the images carefully. The creatures called themselves humans, and they had spread to several planets and moons in their small system. Their ships were primitive compared to Vrathkai technology, and their weapons seemed laughably inadequate. "They are barely worth hunting," another advisor said. "Perhaps we should simply enslave them and move on to more worthy prey." But Kethvaros noticed something in the data that made him curious. These humans had a strange history filled with violence, not just against other species, but against each other. They had fought countless wars among themselves, developing ever more creative ways to kill. A species that practices violence, even without external threats. They may provide some small amusement. He made his decision quickly, as was his way. He would send a harvesting fleet to claim this system called Sol, and add these humans to his collection of conquered peoples. Some would become slaves, some would become prey for the culling, and their world would become another trophy. "Dispatch 30 warships," Kethvaros ordered. "I want this system pacified within 3 rotations. Bring me specimens for examination and prepare their leaders for the submission ceremony." His commanders bowed low and rushed to obey, 30 warships was far more than necessary for such a primitive species. But Kethvaros believed in overwhelming force. It made the conquest faster, and the submission more complete. As the fleet prepared to depart, Kethvaros felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. A new hunt always stirred something primal in his blood, even if the prey seemed unworthy. Perhaps these humans would provide at least a brief moment of entertainment, before they broke like all the others. The Galactic Council received word of the impending conquest, and did nothing. What could they do against the Vrathkai, even if they wanted to help these unknown humans? Ambassador Tethril of the Morvani, one of the elder races on the council, watched the reports with deep sadness in her 4 eyes. She had seen this happen so many times before, a young species full of potential, about to be crushed beneath the Vrathkai boot. "Another world falls," she whispered to her aide. "Another people condemned to slavery or death. I wonder if they even know what is coming for them." The aide, a young Morvani barely a century old, asked the question that many had asked before. "Is there truly nothing we can do to warn them, to help them prepare?" Tethril shook her head slowly. To help them would mean war with the Vrathkai, and that would mean the extinction of our own people. All we can do is watch and mourn. Across the galaxy, the Vrathkai fleet entered faster than light travel, racing toward the Sol system, with weapons charged and hunting instincts sharp. 30 warships, carrying 10,000 of the deadliest warriors the universe had ever known. They expected easy victory. They expected quick surrender. They expected another notch in their belt of conquests. They had no idea that everything they believed about themselves and their place in the universe was about to be shattered forever. In the cold depths of space, humanity waited. They had detected the approaching fleet. They had analyzed its composition. They had studied every scrap of information they could find about the Vrathkai. And unlike every other species the Vrathkai had ever encountered, the humans were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing to fight. The Vrathkai fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and Fleet Commander Vorketh immediately began broadcasting the standard submission ultimatum on all frequencies. It was a message that had been sent to dozens of species before, and it always produced the same result: panic, terror, and swift surrender. "Attention, primitive species," the message declared. "You have been chosen for incorporation into the Vrathkai Empire. You will surrender all military vessels immediately. You will present your leaders for judgment. Resistance will result in complete extermination. You have 1 planetary rotation to comply." Vorketh settled back in his command chair and waited for the fear scent to reach his sensors. Every species reacted the same way when they first saw a Vrathkai war fleet. Their communication channels would fill with screaming, their ships would scatter in chaos, and their leaders would beg for mercy. But the human response was strange. There was no screaming on their channels. There was no chaos among their ships. Instead, the humans seemed to be talking to each other in calm, measured tones, and their vessels were moving into what looked like defensive formations. "Curious," Vorketh muttered. "Perhaps they do not understand the threat they face. Increase the broadcast power and show them visual records of our previous conquests." The communications officer obeyed, sending images of burning cities and fleeing populations, and Vrathkai warriors standing triumphant over piles of enemy dead. Surely this would make the humans understand their situation. A single human vessel began approaching the fleet. It was a small ship, clearly not a warship, and it was broadcasting a request for peaceful communication. "They send a diplomat," Vorketh laughed, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "How delightfully naive. Allow them to approach and bring their representative aboard for the submission ceremony." The human ship docked with the flagship, and a single human female emerged from the airlock. She was called Ambassador Elena Vasquez, and she walked through the corridors of the massive Vrathkai vessel, with her head held high. Vrathkai warriors lined the hallways, towering over her small form, their venomous spines extended in threat display. Any normal prey species would have collapsed from terror by now. But this human kept walking. Vorkath's sensors detected elevated heart rate and stress hormones in her body. She was definitely afraid, but she was not stopping, not freezing, not begging. She just kept walking forward as if fear was merely an inconvenience rather than a command to surrender. Elena Vasquez entered the command chamber and faced the assembled Vrathkai leadership. They loomed over her like living nightmares, their black exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh lights, their infrared eyes burning with predatory hunger. "I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Government," she said in a steady voice. "I am here to discuss terms for peaceful coexistence between our species." The Vrathkai commanders exchanged looks of disbelief. No prey species had ever spoken of coexistence before. They always spoke of submission, of mercy, of their willingness to serve. "You misunderstand your situation, small creature," Vorkath said, leaning forward until his massive head was mere inches from her face. "You do not negotiate with us. You submit to us. That is the only option." "With respect, Commander, there are always other options," Elena replied calmly. "Humanity offers the following terms: mutual non-aggression between our peoples, fair trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and recognition of each other's territorial boundaries." The laughter that erupted from the Vrathkai was a horrible sound, like bones being crushed, mixed with the clicking of insect legs. They found her offer genuinely hilarious. "You are afraid," Vorkath said, tapping a claw against a display showing her biological readings. "Your heart races, your stress hormones spike, your body knows it should flee, yet you stand here making demands as if you have power." Elena nodded slowly. "Yes, I am afraid. Fear is a natural response to danger, and you are clearly very dangerous. But, Commander, humanity has a long history of being afraid and fighting anyway. Fear does not control us. It informs us." She paused, and something in her eyes made Vorkath feel an unfamiliar sensation. "I have been authorized to tell you this. If you attack our worlds, you will be met with the full force of human resistance. We strongly advise against this course of action." "Is that a threat, little creature?" Vorkath asked with amusement. "It is a warning," Elena said. "We do not want war. We would prefer peace, but if war is forced upon us, we will fight with everything we have, and we will not stop fighting until the threat is eliminated. That is not a threat. It is simply what we are." Vorkath studied her for a long moment. This was unusual behavior for prey, but he had seen defiance before. It always crumbled when the killing started. "You have one rotation to surrender," he said finally. "When the sun rises again on your homeworld, the hunt begins. I suggest you use that time to pray to whatever gods your species believes in." Elena Vasquez bowed her head slightly. "Then I have failed in my mission to secure peace. I am sorry for what is about to happen, not just to my people, but to yours as well." She turned and walked back to her ship, with that same steady stride, surrounded by predators who could have killed her in an instant. Not one of them understood that they had just received the most sincere warning any species had ever given them. When her ship departed and returned to human space, Vorkath gave the order to prepare for attack. His warriors sharpened their claws and checked their weapons, eager for the hunt to begin. "What did you think of her?" his second-in-command asked. "She was afraid but pretended not to be," Vorkath replied dismissively. "It is a common prey behavior, false bravery that collapses at the first sign of blood. These humans will break like all the others." He was so very wrong. Across the system, humanity mobilized for war. Soldiers kissed their families goodbye. Factories began running day and night. Weapons that had been built for defense against imagined enemies were suddenly very real and very necessary. Elena Vasquez reported to the United Earth Council with tears in her eyes. They will not negotiate. They see us only as prey. We must prepare for the worst. The Council voted unanimously for total defensive mobilization. And somewhere deep in human territory, old weapons were being pulled from storage, weapons so terrible that humanity had sworn never to use them again. But oaths made in peacetime could be reconsidered when extinction was the alternative. The Vrathkai had hunted countless species across the galaxy. They had never failed. They had never faced true resistance. They were about to learn that humanity played by very different rules. The Vrathkai attacked at dawn, just as they had promised. Their warships descended on the outer human colonies with weapons blazing, expecting the quick slaughter they had enjoyed on countless other worlds. What they found instead would haunt their nightmares forever. On the mining colony of New Helsinki, the first wave of Vrathkai warriors dropped from their landing craft, with claws extended and hunting cries echoing across the frozen landscape. They expected fleeing civilians, screaming prey, easy kills. Instead, they walked into a killing field. The colonists had spent the entire night digging trenches, laying traps, and preparing defensive positions. Miners who had never held weapons stood shoulder to shoulder with the small security force, armed with everything from military rifles to industrial cutting tools. The first Vrathkai charge was met with a wall of gunfire so intense that the snow turned black with alien blood. The warriors faltered, shocked that prey would stand and fight rather than run. A grizzled miner named Viktor Kowalski led a counterattack from the western flank, his team using explosive charges meant for breaking rock to tear holes in the Vrathkai formation. When his rifle ran empty, he picked up a fallen alien weapon and kept firing. "Come on, you ugly bugs," he roared. "You want a hunt? We will give you a hunt." The Vrathkai had infrared vision that let them see heat signatures through walls and darkness. The humans quickly learned this and adapted. They set fires everywhere, deployed thermal decoys, and wore insulated suits that masked their body heat. Suddenly the hunters could not see their prey. Suddenly the humans were appearing from unexpected angles, striking hard and vanishing before the Vrathkai could respond. On the agricultural world of New Cascadia, the farming communities formed militias overnight. Grandmothers who had lived peaceful lives took up sniper rifles. Teenagers helped reload ammunition and run messages between defensive positions. Children as young as 10 years old acted as spotters, their small bodies hidden in places adult fighters could not reach. The Vrathkai had never encountered anything like this. Prey species were supposed to have warriors and civilians, fighters and non-combatants. These humans seemed to blur that line until it did not exist. Every human was a potential threat. Every building was a potential ambush. Every shadow could hide death. Fleet Commander Vorketh received the first combat reports with growing disbelief. Casualties were far higher than projected. Several landing parties had been completely wiped out. Some Vrathkai warriors were actually retreating. "Impossible," he snarled. "These are soft creatures with no natural weapons. How are they killing my warriors?" His tactical officer brought up analysis of captured human weapons. "They compensate for their physical weakness with tools, Commander. Their projectile weapons are crude but effective. Their explosives are devastatingly powerful. They seem to have been preparing for war even while living in peace. Then we will simply use more warriors," Vorketh decided. "Overwhelm them with numbers." But the second wave fared no better than the first. The humans learned and adapted at terrifying speed. They studied Vrathkai tactics and developed counters within hours. They shared information across their communication networks, so that lessons learned on one world were applied on all others instantly. The Vrathkai venom, which could kill most species in seconds, proved useless against humans in sealed combat armor. Their infrared vision became a liability when humans fought in extreme temperatures, that scrambled their sensors. Their superior strength meant nothing against enemies who fought from behind fortifications and never engaged in close combat, unless they chose to. But the worst discovery came when the Vrathkai captured a human outpost on the moon of Europa and took prisoners. They intended to hunt these humans for sport, to demonstrate their superiority and break human morale. It was a terrible mistake. Sergeant Marcus Cole was among those captured. He was wounded, exhausted, and had watched half his squad die in the fighting. By any reasonable measure, he should have been broken. The Vrathkai released him and 11 other prisoners into a section of their ship that had been modified for hunting. It was a maze of corridors and chambers where the aliens would track them down and kill them one by one for entertainment. Marcus Cole had other plans. He gathered the survivors and spoke to them in a whisper. They think we are prey. They think we will run and hide and wait to die. We are going to show them what humans do when we are cornered. Using makeshift tools crafted from debris, the prisoners set traps throughout the hunting maze. They created false trails to confuse the Vrathkai trackers. They found ways to mask their heat signatures, and then they went on the offensive. Marcus himself killed 11 Vrathkai warriors over 36 hours without sleep. He moved through the ship like a ghost, striking from darkness and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Wounded and bleeding, he kept fighting on pure adrenaline, and something the Vrathkai had no word for: spite. When he finally reached the command center of the hunting section, he was barely alive. But he had freed the other prisoners, armed them with captured weapons, and led a breakout that killed 40 more Vrathkai before a rescue team from Earth arrived. The video footage of Marcus Cole's rampage spread through Vrathkai military channels, and for the first time in recorded history, their warriors began to show hesitation. They began to look over their shoulders. They began to fear the shadows. High Predator Kethvaros watched the recordings with an expression his advisors had never seen before. This wounded human, outmatched in every physical way, had turned a Vrathkai hunting ground into a slaughterhouse. "What manner of creatures are these?" he asked quietly. His chief scientist studied the data and offered an answer that chilled the entire command chamber. "They are persistence predators, High Predator. On their homeworld, they hunted prey not by being faster or stronger, but by following it until it collapsed from exhaustion. They do not stop. They do not give up. They simply keep coming until their target is dead." Kethvaros felt something cold settle in his chest, something that might have been the first stirring of doubt. The hunt was supposed to be over in 3 days. 3 weeks later, it had barely begun, and the Vrathkai were bleeding. For the first time in 12,000 years, the greatest predators in the galaxy were beginning to understand what it felt like to be hunted. 3 years into the war, and the galaxy watched in stunned disbelief as the impossible continued to unfold. The mighty Vrathkai Empire, undefeated for 12,000 years, was losing to a species they had dismissed as weak prey. High Predator Kethvaros stood before the strategic display in his war chamber, watching the slow creep of human resistance across territories that had once been firmly under his control. Red zones marked areas of active human operation, and those zones grew larger with each passing month. "How is this happening?" he demanded of his advisors. "We have superior numbers. We have superior technology. We have superior natural weapons. Explain to me how these soft creatures continue to resist." His chief strategist, a scarred veteran named Thrakval, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "High Predator, the humans wage a form of warfare we have never encountered. They call it total war. They commit every resource, every citizen, every innovation to the fight. There is no separation between their military and their society. That should make them easier to defeat," Kethvaros growled. "If everyone is a target, we simply kill everyone." We have tried, High Predator. For every human we kill, 3 more seem to take their place. Their reproduction rate is remarkable, and their industrial capacity is even more so. They build new weapons faster than we can destroy them. The reports from the front lines were horrifying. Human scientists had developed biological weapons that attacked Vrathkai pheromone glands, leaving warriors unable to coordinate with each other. Without the chemical signals that guided their pack tactics, Vrathkai units fell into confusion and were easily destroyed. Human engineers had captured Vrathkai vessels and reverse-engineered their technology in mere months. Innovations that had taken other species centuries to understand were being improved upon and turned against their creators within a single human generation. And the humans had not fought alone for long. Oppressed species throughout the Empire had seen the broadcasts of human victories. They had watched in amazement as their terrible masters suffered defeat after defeat, and they had begun to rise up. The Morvani, who had once watched helplessly as humanity faced conquest, now provided intelligence and supplies to the human resistance. The Krethani, whose homeworld had been a Vrathkai hunting preserve for millennia, launched a rebellion that tied down thousands of warriors. The Selthori used their technical skills to sabotage Vrathkai infrastructure across 3 star systems. Kethvaros found himself fighting a war on dozens of fronts, his forces stretched thin, his supply lines under constant attack, his warriors exhausted and demoralized. But the true nightmare was something his scientists called human persistence. They had studied this phenomenon extensively, trying to understand how humans continue to fight long past the point where any sensible species would surrender. The answer was terrifying. Humans were endurance hunters by evolution. On their homeworld, they had hunted animals not by outrunning them, but by following them at a steady pace until the prey literally collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies were designed to keep moving, keep pushing, keep going when everything else had stopped. Now they were applying this same strategy to war. Every Vrathkai victory was meaningless, because the humans simply retreated, regrouped, and attacked again. Every destroyed human ship was replaced by 3 more. Every fallen soldier became a symbol that inspired hundreds of new recruits. Every burned human city became a rallying cry for vengeance. The humans held grudges across generations. Kethvaros learned of a human concept called revenge that drove individuals to spend their entire lives pursuing those who had wronged them. And now entire human populations were swearing vengeance for the colonies that had been destroyed in the first wave. Vrathkai psychology was built around the quick kill, the decisive strike, the sudden overwhelming attack that ended resistance before it could begin. They were ambushed predators who expected prey to break and flee. Humans did not break. Humans did not flee. Humans just kept coming. Thrakval showed Kethvaros footage from the siege of Vrathkai Outpost 7, where a single human battalion had held out for 6 months against a force 10 times their size. When ammunition ran low, they fought with knives and improvised weapons. When food ran out, they survived on emergency rations and sheer willpower. When reinforcements finally arrived to relieve them, fewer than 50 humans remained alive. Those 50 survivors immediately requested reassignment to combat duty. They do not know when to quit, Thrakval said quietly. They do not understand that they are supposed to surrender when the situation is hopeless. They seem to believe that any fight can be won if they simply refuse to lose. Kethvaros watched more footage. Humans crawling through wreckage with broken limbs to reach enemy positions. Humans holding grenades against their own chests to take out groups of Vrathkai warriors. Humans sending final messages to their families before charging into certain death, smiling as they went. This is not courage, Kethvaros said slowly. This is madness. Perhaps, High Predator, Thrakval replied, but it is a madness that is winning the war. The Galactic Council had changed dramatically over 3 years. Once a powerless gathering of frightened vassal states, it had transformed into a genuine alliance, united behind human leadership. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now holding the title of Coalition Coordinator, had built relationships with dozens of species who saw humanity as their best hope for freedom. The Vrathkai are hunters, she told the council in a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. They are very good at killing, but they have never learned how to fight an enemy that refuses to be killed. They have never faced a species that treats survival as a personal insult to anyone who tries to take it away. She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly at Kethvaros through the camera. We are coming for you, not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, because that is what humans do. We survive, we adapt, we remember, and we never ever stop. In his war chamber, Kethvaros felt the cold certainty of approaching doom. He was old now, worn down by years of a war that should have lasted weeks. His empire was crumbling. His warriors were afraid. His enemies grew stronger every day. For the first time in his long life, the greatest predator in the galaxy understood what it meant to be prey. And the hunters were patient. They had all the time in the universe. They would never stop coming. That was the most terrifying thing of all. The war did not end with a single great battle. It ended the way humans had always won, through relentless, grinding, unstoppable persistence that wore the enemy down until nothing remained. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the flagship Endless Resolve, watching the tactical display as his coalition fleet advanced through the heart of Vrathkai space. Behind him flew ships from 17 different species, all united under a single cause, the destruction of an empire built on fear and blood. Admiral, we are receiving reports from the surface of Kethmora, his communications officer announced. The slave populations have risen up. Vrathkai forces are in full retreat. James nodded calmly. This was the pattern they had followed for 2 years now. The coalition did not simply attack military targets. They liberated worlds. They broadcast messages of hope to oppressed populations. They showed the galaxy that the Vrathkai could bleed. Each freed world provided more soldiers, more resources, more determination. The coalition grew stronger, while the Vrathkai grew weaker. It was exactly the kind of war humans had been fighting among themselves for thousands of years. High Predator Kethvaros watched his empire collapse from his throne room on the Vrathkai homeworld. Reports flooded in from every sector. Defeats, retreats, rebellions, surrenders. Species that had served the Vrathkai for millennia were throwing off their chains and joining the coalition. He was old now, his exoskeleton showing the dull gray of advanced age. The war had consumed 5 years of his life, and he had nothing to show for it but failure and shame. High Predator, his aide announced with trembling voice. The human fleet has entered our home system. They will reach our world within 6 rotations. Kethvaros rose slowly from his throne. Then we will make our final stand here. Gather every warrior, every ship, every weapon we have left. If we must die, we will die as predators. The Battle of Vrathkai Prime lasted 6 days, and it was the bloodiest engagement of the entire war. The remaining Vrathkai fleet fought with desperate ferocity, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything they had built over 12,000 years. But humans had learned to fight Vrathkai. They knew every tactic, every weakness, every vulnerability. And they had allies now, species who had been hunted and enslaved and terrorized for generations, all eager to see their tormentors fall. Admiral Okonkwo commanded the battle with cold precision. He sent wave after wave of ships against the Vrathkai defenses, accepting losses that would have broken any other commander, knowing that his forces could afford to lose ships while the Vrathkai could not. On the 4th day, the Vrathkai defensive line broke. On the 5th day, their orbital stations fell. On the sixth day, human marines landed on the surface of the Vrathkai homeworld for the first time in history. Keth was captured alive in his throne room, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard. He had fought until his claws were broken and his venom glands were empty. But even the greatest predator could not stand against 100 human soldiers in powered armor. They did not kill him. That would have been too easy, too merciful. Instead, they put him in chains and transported him to a prison vessel for transport to trial. The war was over. Across the galaxy, celebrations erupted on liberated worlds. Species that had lived in terror for thousands of years danced in the streets and wept with joy. The nightmare was finally ended. But for the survivors of the human colonies that had been attacked in those first terrible days, there was no celebration. Only a cold satisfaction that justice would finally be served. The trial of High Predator Keth was held on a neutral station, broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species sat in the gallery, watching as the architect of countless atrocities faced judgment. Elena Vasquez, now Secretary General of the newly formed Galactic Union, served as chief prosecutor. She presented evidence of genocide, enslavement, and systematic terror that stretched back millennia. The testimony of survivors filled days of hearings, their stories of horror and loss bringing even hardened diplomats to tears. When it came time for Keth to speak in his own defense, the ancient predator rose slowly in his restraints and faced the court with what remained of his dignity. "You want me to apologize," he said. "You want me to beg for mercy as so many of your kind begged from mine, but I will not do this. I am Vrathkai. I am a predator. I did what predators do." He turned his gaze directly to Elena Vasquez. "You judge me for hunting weaker species, but you have done the same. You hunted us across the galaxy. You destroyed our empire. You stand in judgment over us now. How are you any different?" Elena met his gaze without flinching. "We did not hunt you for sport. We did not enslave your children. We did not hold festivals where we killed your people for entertainment. We fought you because you gave us no choice. And we stopped fighting the moment you stopped being a threat." She leaned forward. "That is the difference between us. You killed because you enjoyed it. We killed because we had to. And the moment you surrendered, we began thinking about how to rebuild rather than how to punish." Keth laughed bitterly. "You call yourself civilized, but I have seen what your species can do when pushed. I have seen your soldiers fight with broken bodies and shattered minds. I have seen your people sacrifice themselves without hesitation. You are not civilized, you are monsters wearing masks." "Perhaps," Elena acknowledged, "but we are monsters who learn to control our impulses. We are predators who chose to become something more. We are not proud of what we can become when threatened, but we do not deny it either." The Vrathkai believed they were the ultimate predators because they had claws and venom and strength. They never understood that true survival comes from the mind, from the heart, from the will to endure anything and emerge stronger. Humanity did not defeat the Vrathkai because we were more dangerous. We defeated them because we were more adaptable, more cooperative, more stubborn. We defeated them because when everything seemed hopeless, we refused to accept defeat. She turned back to Keth one final time. "You thought we were prey. You were wrong. We are survivors, and we will do whatever it takes to remain that way." The tribunal found Keth guilty on all counts. He would spend the rest of his long life in prison, watching as the empire he had built was transformed into something better. And across the galaxy, a new age began. An age where humanity stood not as conquerors, but as guardians. Not as predators, but as protectors. Not as fearless monsters, but as determined survivors who had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the will to endure. The Vrathkai had called themselves fearless cosmic predators. That was before they encountered humans.